Are you a strong, optimistic woman? Are you ready to see the end of the topic we're talking about today, which is racism? Are you wondering what you can do to be in the space of celebration? I know that seems two opposite kind of techniques, but boom, we're here. This is part of the SOW Victory Fest 2022, our pre-talk show. And I'm excited because you're going to get a sneak peek of the SOW Victory Fest, the people, the energy we're creating. This is an inaugural global virtual festival. And yes, we are calling all strong, optimistic women and men who support them. So let's get into it today. You can watch these replays on our website at sowvictory.com under the speak area. Just go to the talk show in the minute. And now I want to talk a little bit about my guest today, the Reverend Dr. Terrlyn Avery. She is a pastologist, an ordained minister, and licensed psychologist. She invites people into transformation through the journey of what she calls sacred intelligence. You know, doesn't that just feel good? Tapping into one's internal source to make intelligent choices that manifest the good of humanity. She helps leaders discover how their sphere of influence can change the status quo and dismantle racism. Yes, that word again. She's the author of Sacred Intelligence, The Essence of Sacred, Selfish, and Shared Relationships, and the book Dismantling Racism, Healing Separation from the Inside Out. She's also the host of the podcast Dismantle Racism on talkradio.nyc. And she's also, Reverend Dr. Terrlyn Avery is the pastor at the Martin Luther King Jr. Community Presbyterian Church in Springfield, Massachusetts. And she's a dear friend of mine. So let's bring her up. I'm so excited to have you here, Terrlyn.
Hi, Laura.
Yes, to talk to us. I know you're going to guide us about, when we're at the SOW Victory Fest, about how we can see the truth and discuss and address it positively, with positivity outwardly. So the whole idea is to dismantle racism. That is a big topic. So let's back way up first.
Okay.
Tell us about your background and story and how we're here today.
Well, how I'm here today is really because of my passion with helping undeserved populations. That's how I started my career as a psychologist. I worked with inner city youth in public schools, and I also worked with kids who were in juvenile justice systems. And what I noticed a difference between how young Black and brown children were treated versus how white children were treated. So white children would often end up in psychiatric institutions, and children of color would end up in the prison system. And so I've really just been passionate very early on. I mean, it even goes back further than that, but I'll start there with looking at the disparities that exist. So as a part of my background, here I'm a psychologist, I'm working, and then I got this calling to go into ministry. And one might think that ministry is vastly different from working as a psychologist, but they really aren't. And so one of the things that happened is over time, as I was doing my work, dismantling racism in school systems, traveling the country and teaching educators about how to dismantle racism, over time, I saw a way to sort of merge my loves. And really the country called me to it. Because if I'm going to be totally honest, Laura, I actually thought that I was done teaching people about dismantling racism when I began ministry. I really thought I was going to work on the wounds of religion. And then we had all of these shootings taking place of unarmed Black men. And I had a really good friend to say to me, "You are a leader. You are called to do this work. You've done it before. You must do this work." And I happened to be pastoring a white church at the time. So talk about the dynamics of that. So again, because of what's happening in the country, I cannot, in good consciousness, not address racism at a global level. I do it on a smaller level anyway, but I had to return to what I know that I'm called to do.
Well, one of our tracks at the SOW Victory Fest is about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and addressing this topic of how do we deal with racism. But in the description of today's show, we talked about the matrix, that how many of us are living in this matrix of kind of like not knowing the racism that's out there, or to the extent that the disparity is. And by talking with you over the last several months and years, I feel like I've taken the red pill. Also, I think our society was given the option to take the red pill by the huge outpouring of communication and exposure through in 2020 that happened with the George Floyd incidents. And then realizing that that's not the only one. This thing is pervasive and always has been, but we've been behind the matrix. And so I want to know is, can you break it down for us? What it is like in hiding in plain sight? What is racism, the racism matrix we're living in?
So one of the things that we have to do is to become conscious, because often, and you and I have had this conversation with white people saying that they didn't know. It's a conscious choice not to know. So I just want to be clear about that, because George Floyd was one of many that have been killed in the last several years only, right? And so if people choose to be unconscious about what's happening around them, then they can avoid seeing racism. And that's why we can say it's hiding in plain sight. Yes, we live in a self-absorbed world, but when you see people repeatedly being shot and killed and then asking questions, well, why didn't they just do what they were supposed to do? And I'm thinking, were you looking at the same video that everybody else was looking at? People of color were looking at? So I want to invite our audience into the space of consciousness, saying, what don't I know that I need to know? If we have Black and brown people talking about racism, is there something that I'm missing? So let's not get defensive about it, but let me go inward to examine, what am I not seeing? Now, we could say seeing someone murdered, that's drastic. Everybody could see racism there. But I want to invite us to just look at the everyday things that are happening. And again, this is about being consciously aware, making a decision that I will see racism where it exists. So if we think about the confirmation hearings with Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, we see, if you go back and if you look at those confirmation hearings, we see that she was held to a higher standard than a white man or even a white woman in the ways in which she could respond during the confirmation hearings. People of color could see her sit with her composed self and understand what she was going through in that moment, recognizing that I cannot answer or respond in the same way as a white person. But not only that, we have to begin to ask the right questions. Why are they asking her a question about critical race theory? Would they have asked someone else about critical race theory? And we might argue that yes, they would have. But we have to look at specifically, why are they asking her? Why are they asking her things that have nothing to do with her making a legal decision? So I'm pointing that out because when we become consciously aware, we began to notice the disparities. We began to notice how people are treated differently based on the color of their skin. We began to notice that a person like the judge, or even a person like myself, who's highly educated, it doesn't matter how educated we are at times, people will always question whether we belong in the room. And that's the thing that we have to, take a look at.
I love the invitation to become more conscious. I
Mhm.
was just driving the other day, and uh, before I took the red pill, and allegorically here, I may not have noticed this, but now that I'm asking myself the question is, where is racism in plain sight? The
Mhm.
other day, I was driving and I saw across the street, it was a lot of traffic. Two cop cars stopped a Mercedes, and in the Mercedes was a black man.
Mhm.
And so now I'm thinking, because in the past I wouldn't have thought anything about it other than there's cop cars and there's something going on. But now I'm thinking, is this a racial incident, like a racially
Profile.
motivated incident?
Mhm.
Meaning, why two cop cars?
Mhm.
Why this person? I mean, I saw it for literally 20 seconds, but at least I'm starting to ask myself the question. It wasn't like I could stop and do anything to check it out. I don't feel like it maybe was my business or not business. I've heard people say that they're stopping to bear witness as a way of solidarity, as a way of support, as a way of being in action to dismantle racism.
Mhm.
But I do think there's the very minimal speaking it, like talking to people about what I just saw. Did I see, and questioning it? Did I just see something racist go down?
Mhm.
Or was it actually something? I mean, it looked like they were having a civil conversation. There was no, the cops were outside, the guy was inside. There was no hostility looking. It looked like a conversation. So, I was happy to that end to see, but I
Mhm.
don't know what transpired after that.
So I have to just say something, because what looked like a conversation to you could have been a lot more happening, and even what it caused for that black man to be stopped by the police, the angst it probably caused in him to be stopped by the police. But I want to just say, even when we're talking about the noticing, I'm glad you noticed that he was pulled over, but the noticing of the spaces that we're in, who is in those spaces and who is considered to belong in those spaces, so that when it's a person of color in a predominantly white area, there's always a questioning, because the assumption is you don't belong here, and if you are here, it's because you are the help. So I know that there have been plenty of times that as people of color, we can be in an office and someone comes in, they will assume that we're the secretary rather than assuming we're the person in charge. Or if we're walking through a store, having people to say to us when we say, can I see that particular bag up there, handbag? Well, no, I don't think you can afford that. Well, how do you know what I can afford? These are the things that happen. And if you're in a store, if you began to just notice how people of color are treated versus how a white person is treated, that's the racism hiding in plain sight. And to be able to hear our stories when we're talking about them, rather than there being this disbelief that it's happening. So I talk about going inward to examine, what in me do I need to get rid of, to take the blinders off for, so that I can see racism that's hiding in plain sight.
Love it. And that leads me to my next question is, so we go inward. So your approach to eradicating racism, how is it different than what's being done out there by others?
Well, I think it really is the approach of going inward. And for me, I invite people to start with, what's your why? Why are you doing this? And particularly, I ask people to start with their why, because what I saw in 2020 was, I saw a lot of people being energized about racism. And there was this major discussion about it. And I saw a lot of my white colleagues being really hurt, because they didn't realize that racism existed, angry that it existed, and really charged up, ready to fight the fight. Well, I try not to use violent language, so let me pull back, ra- wanting to move ahead, not fight. because I do believe that there's a way that we can do this in love. And so, but what I realized is people were so immersed in it that they didn't pace themselves and did not think about their why. Your why, because this work is very demanding and it's overwhelming, your why has to be greater than your sacrifices, even because you're going to sacrifice something through this. And so your why has to be because you're tapping into that sacred part of you and understanding that we're all a part of a shared humanity. And once you know your why, that will help you move forward. I've seen a lot of those people who were rah, rah, rah in 2020. They're silent now.
Mm.
You have to pace yourself.
I think we need to talk about the why. I don't even think people know why it's important. You know, until you start talking to people and start reading what is the effect of racism on a white person, on a neighbor of a white person, on, why does racism impact us all and why is it important to address?
Right.
I think that's a very, very important thing because racism costs us all something.
You know what? I can tell you in dollars and cents what it costs you because people, they can get with the money. So both my kids attend an HBCU. Throughout the year, there have been multiple bomb threats. So what does it cost us when you have to have the police, when you have to have a bomb squad, when you have to have all of these departments come together to investigate whether there's actually a bomb threat? That costs you money just like it costs me money because if you pay your taxes, it's going to cost you money. So that's the financial piece of it. But we also know that it costs us money emotionally too. It costs us as well as who we decide to hire when you could be missing out on some great talent. But I could go on and on and on, but I know that we don't have much time here.
And I know your book will point out a lot of that. And I want to make sure that we talk about what you're going to talk about at the SOW Victory Fest. And I think it's more than a talk, it's an experience. So give us a taste of what people will walk away with when they attend your session at the SOW Victory Fest. Dismantle racism hidden in plain sight.
So really, I will get into some of the things that we've talked about today. I'll do some interactive techniques with you to get you to think about how you can see racism hiding in plain sight, how you can begin to tap into your, what I call sacred intelligence, to figure out what your why is and to know how dedicated you are. And so it's really going to be a time of ahas, and you will recognize some things about yourself that you didn't even know existed. So it doesn't matter whether you're a person of color or whether you are a white person, the work that we do there will give you, really will give you the energy and give you the motivation and the faith to continue this work.
So tapping into our why and getting how can we move through this space of racism to the other side. There's a lot of hope here. I love that you have approach of love as well. So it's not that violent term that we're going to avoid. And we need to move towards that as a world. And that is precious work that you're doing. So I'm honored to be in this space with you once again. And for those of you who want to join us at SOW Victory Fest or just watch more of our replays or our talk sessions, follow us on social media. All of our links on our social media from our website at SOWvictory.com, all the way at the bottom of the page. As you can see, this is the top of the page. Scrolling down to the bottom, we will have the links there for you to follow us on social media. And we love for you to check out the site if you want to speak, if you want to join us. SOWvictory.com. Reverend Dr. Terrlyn, I am so blessed to have you in my life. Thank you.
Likewise, Laura, likewise.